Welcome back. Now, we move into our third category, mythical zoology, or mythozoology if I'm feeling frisky. And here we have animals people used to believe in, but that nobody really does anymore. Discredited zoology, you might say, or cryptozoology that was finally given up on. This is an enormous and varied group of creatures, dragons and unicorns and vampires and wakandagis, which are deer snake hybrids that live in rivers in the Omaha tradition, and just on and on and on. And the reason for this is that every culture in every time throughout the world and its history makes up monsters. Why? A couple reasons. Actually, numberless reasons. Nearly as many reasons as there are monsters. Some monsters are pure savagery, enemies of the social order, and very little else. The indigenous Australian wowie was a giant six-legged monitor lizard that would maybe eat you, and that was enough. Oh heavens, that was more than enough. Some were supernatural punishers and avengers, like most of the Greek monsters, and also, for but one more example, the Japanese tengu, crowmen, or alternately winged men with noses that make me uncomfortable. Who, among other things, would harass and bedevil hypocritical priests, a purpose for which we, of course, no longer have any use. Glad that's over. Some were guardians. The Mesopotamian Gertablilu stood watch in the mountains between the lands of the living and the dead. I think maybe the Ozarks. I don't know. And they were scorpion centaurs, and I want to go make friends with them. A popular theme was that monsters were the forces of primordial chaos that had to be swept away by gods or culture heroes in order for civilization to begin. One of the first and greatest of these was Tiamat, pictured here and also here. But the forces of primordial chaos have nothing better to do than chase baby unicorns and be tricked by teenagers. Some were faces put on more prosaic but no less dangerous phenomena. The Greek Hydra's propensity for growing two heads whenever one would be cut off is thought to represent the difficulty of damming an oncoming flood. Also, the Hydra's name means water. That's also a clue. And some were just weird animals. The Wasgo, known to the Haida people of the Pacific Northwest, was a wolf-orca hybrid. And what do you want, a story? Wolf-orca hybrid. I'm making this sound more clean-cut than it is. A lot of these creatures fit into multiple categories, or others, or none. They're difficult to pin down, partially because their stories would be told over hundreds of years, and we've been telling stories about Spider-Man for 55 years, and how many versions of him are there? A billion? And the monsters are also difficult to pin down because that is their nature as interstitial creatures, as mentioned previously. Most of them are hybrids of existing animals, sometimes obviously, like a chimera made of a lion and a snake, and also a goat for some reason. The Greeks were into goats. Like what you know, I suppose. And sometimes vaguely. A dragon has a reptilian hide and tail, bat's wings, a body resembling a cat's or a bird's, and so on, all blended together, rather than chopped into pieces and glued into a hole. Often it's with a specific purpose that these hybridizations occur. An animal made of perceived opposites. A cynocephalus is both man and beast. Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, is of both earth and sky. Chrysaor, the flying boar, is of both pig and wings. Sometimes it's just a super cool combination. I'm just going to put up this picture of the Wasgo again. But it is always a creature that is neither here nor there, or simultaneously both, and as such it is a threat to the established order, an outsider, unaccounted for in our shape of the world, and thus it is of course a threat, and at the same time it has the outsider's allure, the attraction of the forbidden. Many monsters come paired with their hero, and indeed a hero's opposite number used to be a monster far more often than it was a human villain in the olden days. Not anymore. I'm telling you, everything is going straight down the toilet ever since they got rid of New Coke. And so monsters have all the glorious allure of villainy. And it's been said that monsters serve as a power fantasy to those drawn to outsiders, and gods are a power fantasy for the more authoritarian. By me. I'm the one who said that. Before you get too excited about it. The actual origins of individual monsters are a matter of some debate. On the one hand, you have the all myths are based on reality crowd who believe that there's some underpinning in reality to every story, like when Athena was born by bursting forth from Zeus's head fully armed and armored, which was based on when some woman came out of a house or something and she was mad. I don't know. Oh, I make gentle fun, but there is a good degree of truth to this idea. The earliest descriptions of the unicorn, for example, described a one-horned horse-like animal that is large and has elephant's feet. And this is generally considered to be a garbled report of a rhinoceros. I mean, basically someone saw a rhino and I guess hit their head probably, and there were little chirping birds flying around it, and they came up with a unicorn. So it goes. But this idea also goes too far. An effort to demonstrate that the griffin is based on Protoceratops skeletons, while surprisingly convincing in a lot of respects, fails to take into account that the griffin motif appears in the East Mediterranean area thousands of years before contact between that area and areas containing Protoceratops fossils was established. But more importantly, it also fails to take into account that taking the best land animal and taping it to the best sky animal is just good thinking. Intuitive, really. Always do that when you can. When determining the origins of mythical creatures, it is always good to allow for imagination. So, as far as history is concerned, the question would be, when did humans first start inventing mythical animals? And the answer would seem to be pretty much immediately. This is the Lion Man of Hohensteinstadt. That's in Germany, by the way. The German language is angry and it wants you to be angry too. The Lion Man is 35 to 40,000 years old, carved out of ivory, and it is the oldest known example of figurative art, which is to say art that represents something, and it represents a person with a lion's head. A mythical creature is literally the first thing that humans ever illustrated. Unfortunately, due to its extreme antiquity, nothing is really known about it, or its connection to the Sword of Omens. Indeed, there is in fact some debate as to whether the figure is intended to be male or female. Because first things first, you know, mysterious hot lion-headed figure that represents the beginning of humans depicting things, are you M or F? The genital area is worn off and no longer identifiable, and tell me about it, right, fellas? And the head has no mane, which is taken by many to indicate a lioness. But then it is also true that male European lions didn't have manes either, and probably this is all about men, don't you think? I mean, it's a thing that exists. Moving up to between 17 and 12,000 years ago, we have cave art in the Grotte de Gabillou in France depicting a bison-headed person, which is of course not as cool as a lion-headed person, but they didn't have television or anything yet, they were still learning. And then 13,000 years ago, the famous sorcerer from the French cave of Trois Frères. Here we have an antlered humanoid figure, also possessed of a tail and a stance like he's being a bunny at a naughty party. And indeed, his penis is plainly visible behind his legs in profile. Ladies. This, and to a lesser degree the bison minotaur, are generally taken as shamanic figures, wearing animal clothing as a part of a ritual to assist their fellows in their physical activities, not unlike the San Diego chicken. I'm not kidding. Of course, the emphasis on genitalia could mean that this picture is some sort of proto-furry. But any remarks along these lines have, of course, been squashed by big paleoanthropology. They can't deal with it. Me neither. After this, I feel there is no single coherent history of mythical creatures in general. They were apparently one of the first activities of symbolic imagination, the face of the earth, and have behaved like it ever since. They are too many and too varied to possibly relate, even in broad strokes, though I have spent the last 5 years in this project trying to do so, along with the other 3 categories, and presumably will continue for the rest of my life. Earlier this year, I described Reverend Matt's Monster Science to Guillermo del Toro, and he said, "Oh, you're my kind of guy." And so I have been knighted. Now I have to keep doing monster science forever. I'll do it to the rats in the sewer if I have to. I am an agent of the king. But here now, we will just touch on a few of the creatures that appear over and over again in cultures around the world and why that might be. The most mysterious of these would appear to be the dragon. It does appear to be a fact that enormous supernatural reptiles, particularly snakes, appear in cultures all around the world. One excellent overview of this is, of course, A Field Guide to Dragons, Serpents, and Worms of the World, written by an excellent local scholar and available in fine bookstores everywhere, if I'm in them and have one on me. Many of the dragons are serpentine, from the aforementioned Quetzalcoatl to the Australian rainbow serpent, and indeed even Western dragons started off as giant snakes in classical times, hence the worm appellation. And why they'd be everywhere is an unanswered question. I mean, snakes are scary, but so is asking people to go on dates with you, and there isn't a global monomyth about that. Or no, actually there totally is. But it still doesn't solve the dragon problem. Happily, some explanations have been put forth. Spoiler alert, none of them are very good. There are those that believe that there was once a globe-spanning serpent worship cult, later remembered dimly all over the world as dragons. The primary evidence of this is dragons. The secondary evidence is shut up. Speaking of shut up, there's also a theory that the dragon myth is based on the reptoids, these being reptilian space aliens of modern UFO lore, noted for living underground and disguising themselves as the British royal family. This is, of course, absolutely correct. The astronomer Carl Sagan, noted for being very smart indeed, and if my memories of the television of my childhood are correct, having his very own spaceship, has proposed that dragons are racial memories of dinosaurs, a nightmare of colossal reptilian predators coded into our very genes. It's not a bad idea, actually. 65 million years would seem like enough time to get over being prey to the dinosaurs, I grant you. But then we were scurrying rats to them for 150 million years before that, and that just might get to a taxonomic class. Dragons have also been said to be a Jungian archetype, archetypes being a set of ideas that the famed psychologist believed to be native, endemic to the human experience. Mythological ideas like the trickster or the world tree, transmitted among us by something called the collective unconscious. Now, Jung never proved the existence of the collective unconscious, and his followers since then have proven it even less. It has nevertheless influenced later universal myth theorists like Joseph Campbell, who in turn influenced George Lucas, creator of Jar Jar Binks. But none of this is really good scholarship anymore. Both Jung and Campbell's ideas of everybody telling the same stories have been shown to be the result of their use of the really high-quality shoehorns. There's another dinosaurs as dragons hypothesis, but it is espoused by people I promise not to talk about anymore. And so we're back to square one again. There are dragons everywhere in the stories of humanity, and to put it simply, no one knows why. Chalk it up as another grand mystery of the human imagination. Or reptoids. One of them. More on this, please consult the Field Guide to Dragons, Serpents, and Worms of the World. It also makes an excellent gift. Other global monster types are perhaps a bit easier to explain. Everybody in the world has giants, for one, and these giants are frequently very old, older than humanity, and serve the role mentioned earlier of entities from the beginning of time that must be overcome so that we can have cities and farms and Dairy Queens and so on. Also, every single living human, save for a wolf child here and there, spent their formative years of their lives in the company of beings much larger than themselves, who hold the keys to life and death, and whose influence over us must be overthrown if we are to come into our own lives. So, there you have it. Still, there is also something in the giant myth about an almost instinctive understanding we all have of the power, intellect, wisdom, and moral uprightness of people who are very tall. I salute this. On the other end of the spectrum, you have the little people, also a global idea, and normally magical and mischievous. This may be in part because it is not just children who are allowed to have anxieties about other generations. Mermaids and mermen are ubiquitous because people want to have sex with fish. Which is fine as a kink, but hard to justify as consensual. And then, of course, there are the roosters with serpents' tails. These are hatched when a rooster lays an egg and it is incubated by a toad or snake, though if one takes the egg from the reptile or amphibian and throw it over your house without letting it touch your house, its hatching will be prevented. Life hack, This works with other eggs too. But if you don't do this, the snake-tailed rooster will hatch, and it will be so poisonous that its gaze itself will kill a man. So poisonous that if you kill it with a sword, its poison will climb up the sword and kill you through your hand, apparently. Its only vulnerability is the venom of the weasel. You know, the venom of the weasel. Which will kill it dead. In Europe, this monster was called the cockatrice. In other lands, it was called nothing. This is not a global monster, actually. It is, in fact, medieval Europe being breathtakingly bananas. Also among the numberless purely local creatures is the Wasgo, pictured here. The Choctaw Stickini were people who would take out their internal organs at night and hang them over tree branches. The rest of them would change into an owl and spend the night drinking people's blood. This makes Western vampires seem like pathetic, weeping milquetoasts, and I'll fight anyone who says different. The Mypolina from Guyana is a 10-foot water smilodon with sloth claws and a cow tail and drooping ears. And if that doesn't keep you kids out of the river, then fine, whatever. Go ahead, I tried. There are villages of Chichewas in southern Africa who look pretty normal, except they always have hats or done-up hair to cover the hyena snout that protrudes from the top of their head. They can take hyena form, albeit with a vestigial shriveled human face on the throat. They mostly would mind their own business, only occasionally getting into some shifty marriage trade shenanigans. Nobody wanted to marry them, not because they were evil, but because nobody wanted to marry somebody who can turn into a hyena. And have it your way. For my part, if there's anyone here who can change into a hyena, please accept this as my sincere and deeply felt marriage proposal to you. It's not even a sexual thing, I just have plans. In Japan, there were kappas, monkey-like creatures with turtle shells and a sort of bowl on the top of the head. This bowl was filled with water, and this water gave a kappa its strength. They lived in rivers and ate cucumbers and occasionally challenged passers-by to single combat. They were very powerful, and this was bad news, but luckily, if you opened the duel by bowing to the kappa, as you certainly should have anyway, it would bow in return, spilling the water from its bowl and rendering it powerless. I don't have a joke about that. That is amazing. The Australian Dinabaradas are emu-legged people who make excellent boomerangs and eat only grubs and might take you captive, but will be distracted if you release the bandicoot from your bag, because then they would have to chase after it, and this is all a valuable lesson in all of those things. This could go on all night. It won't, this time. But it does begin to demonstrate the glorious wonders of the human imagination. And that brings us to our final category of monsters, the holy